All right, welcome back. The thing that we were just talking about was going ahead and expanding these scenes into their various 5 scene points. We talked about what each of these scene points sort of means for those of you who are sort of new to this particular system. A lot of the people who are going to be listening and watching aren't all that new to it, so those people may have skipped ahead. I'm not going to recap. If you missed it, go back and see the last part. Basically, though, the reason that we use these 5 is because it reflects how we navigate the world. We have something in mind, some goal, something is happening. We encounter some sort of a complication. As we explore that complication and decide how we're going to navigate around it or deal with it, something is revealed. We learn something. Based on that new information, we make a change or a choice. We reorient, and sometimes that choice can be to plow right through it. Either way, we make some sort of a choice, and then that choice leads to some sort of an outcome. That is true not just in fiction, it's true for basically every interaction you have in life. If you're just driving, if you just decide that it's time to buy groceries and you get in your car, you're going to have a goal. Complication might be traffic. Revelation might be that there's a route that's better than the traffic that you're on. If you're looking at Google Maps or Waze or something like that, change may be the choice to, go the way that's going to take an extra couple of miles, or to stay where you are and do that because it's ultimately going to be slower. You're going to collect information through the exploratory process of that third point, and then the outcome will be that in real life, probably you just arrive a few minutes later than you expected, or a few minutes earlier. In fiction, sticking to that busy route is going to mean that you probably encounter some sort of an event, like a car crash or something like that. Who knows? But the point is, those 5 things, they ensure that a scene is well paced. They ensure that you're able to control the pace if you want to. If you need to draw out a particular scene, or if you need to shorten it, you can do that by changing how many words you devote to each of these points on average. And also it gives you really specific goals to follow while you're writing the scene, which speeds up your process, right? So for example, we know from before that our average scene is going to run about 2,200 words because of how many scenes we have and how long we want the book to be. 2,200 divided by those 5 points is around 440 words a piece. That's roughly 5 or 6 medium-sized paragraphs per point. I'll show you later how exactly that number plays out and how it is that we actually take the scene and we write and we keep an eye on that word count as we go in order to hit the length that we want for the scene. But for instance, so that we're thinking about it ahead of time and you're thinking about it with me as I plot these scenes out, let's say that we have a section where we know that we want to charge through a couple of scenes really quickly. They're subplot scenes, they're not integral to the plot. We know that there's a scene coming up that's going to be a little bit longer. Like when you write romance, if you write adult romance with that have adult scenes in them, sex scenes, you can generally count on those scenes being a little bit longer, at least if you're the type of author who enjoys sort of dragging out a sex scene a little bit and making it extra titillating and having foreplay and all this other stuff. So you can calculate a little bit differently, and we can say that in a scene that's going to involve a lot of sex, we can assume that we're going to have an extra couple of thousand words. So maybe we'll say that that scene is going to run about 3,500 words. Divide that by 500. Sorry, 3,500 words. Divide that by 5, and we're going to get 700 words per point in the scene. Sex scenes in general, as just a side note, they're generally going to start around point 4. They might get started in point 3. They're going to take up most of the chapter a lot of the time. So that's just something to keep in mind. So that would tell us, exactly how far along in the scene we are and when we need to start writing the bridge. That process, actually writing to these 5 points, that's going to be the last thing that you see in this video when I write chapter 1, or scene 1 at least, based on that 440 number per plot point. Having those goals makes it a lot easier to hit your daily targets really fast. You can basically tell yourself you're going to write 440 words at a time. You write those 440 words for scene point 1. You take a short break to consider what happens in the next point, what kind of complication there is, and how to approach it, how to write it. At the end of that 440 words, you look at plot point. You take a break, look at plot point 3, the revelation. How are you going to handle that, and so on and so forth. You'd be surprised how having these very small, sort of short-term goals can build up to a really effective long-term goal. I think I mentioned at the beginning about how long it takes me to write a novel, and that wasn't an exaggeration. There are a lot of people out there who will probably say that's just not possible, you can't do it that way. You've seen for yourself how I go through this process, that there is a specific process, there's a specific strategy in mind, and every part of my writing process is strategic in that way, including the process of actually writing the novel. It's strategic because, again, I have to write efficiently in order to produce novels quickly. Certain types of readers expect your novels really fast. Romance readers, they read fast. They read 2 or 3 romance novels a week. Like, they read constantly. Whereas, for instance, fantasy readers who enjoy epic fantasy, you know, they're fine to wait a whole year for the next iteration of a series or the next novel from Neil Gaiman, or they will wait a whole generation to get a new novel from George R.R. Martin. In those cases, you don't have to produce quite as fast, although being able to draft quickly does mean that you can get your draft to the editor. The editor can give you their suggestions and changes and whatnot, and then you can again redraft very, very quickly. So it's worthwhile to have some sort of a good, solid strategic process based on short-term goals that add up to good long-term goals. At the very end of this, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to meet those goals and that sort of thing. That'll be the very last thing that I talk about. It'll be after I show you exactly how quickly I can write one of these scenes based on using short-term goals. So with that said, it's time to go through and start filling these things out. I want to make one note here, and that is that you see the character profiles down here. One of the things that you didn't see in this process, it's conspicuously absent, and it's absent on purpose, is the character interview. This is a very, very popular way of supposedly building really deep characters with thorough backstories and flaws and quirks and tweaks and things like that. All of that is folded into, in a very subtle way, folded into the character arc process. That gives you almost everything you need to know about the character that's relevant to this story. Filling out that stuff, that is stuff that we will do at the very end before we start actually writing the scenes, and we'll do that based on all of the information we've gathered so far. So we have constructed a story based on characters, and then we will further construct characters based on the story that emerged from it. When you do it this way, you already know the various choices your character is likely to make, and you can go back and look at their backstory and personality, and you can justify those things. The reason that those specific details aren't here yet is because the key to outlining fast, really, really fast, and then developing a novel really, really fast is to wait on the details, to get the structure down, to fluff the structure just a little bit, to fill out the scenes, to fluff them a little bit more, and only then, at that point, when you've got a really good handle on the characters already, that's the best time to really go back and hammer out exactly who this person is, what their personality is like based on the evidence that you have in front of you. So it's an exploration of character, an exploration of plot. It's an exploratory method of developing a novel, and I mean, you can already see it happens really beautifully well. So that's all going to come later, but we will do that. You may have noticed that there's a file right here that says outline, and that may have you wondering, well, what is all this then? This is the outline, but it's good to have that outline in a cohesive place. So after I finish with these scenes, fleshing out all of these scenes, I'm going to show you how in Scrivener you can actually compile just these two sections of the document into one. In my case, it's going to be probably a Word document. I'm using Adobe Office for this machine. But that's what that's for. I'll export that and then copy and paste the entire outline into one place. The only reason that I do that is so I can have sort of a comprehensive high-level view. That's the point at which I actually go back and do my last revision for the whole thing, which is you revise again and only then write the book. So there's a revision step after actually writing all of the scenes. So I'm going to go and flesh out all 31 of these scenes. I want you to take a look at the time here, 2:58 p.m. This is Pacific Standard Time, not that it matters. But this process, I'm going to fast forward through it all, but it is going to be continuous. So take note of the night time here, and then look at the time when we're done. Because this is where the bulk of the actual storytelling potential, the plot that we can actually write to, this is where that stuff happens. He's been having this ongoing conversation, so we'll talk a little bit about the fact that he knows that he's going to this meeting and so on. We're going to introduce his parole officer here. We're not going to know immediately that that's his parole officer. It's going to be someone that Cable knows and doesn't like, and knows that the officer doesn't like him, and then of course by the end of this chapter we'll reveal that that's actually going to be his parole officer, and he'll have kind of a groan moment. Cable finally learns the meeting is not about consideration. Today they're releasing right now. So this is going to be kind of surprising to him. We're going to see how he reacts to shock. It's going to be one of those things where he just sort of plays it cool, and that's going to show us that that's how he handles those things, is to not react. This is going to show us that as much as he's kind of a bad boy and, you know, ended up in prison, that sort of thing, he makes bad choices, but he doesn't make them reactively. He makes them proactively. And we want to know that about Cable because we want the reader to know that he's the type of person who does things with consideration, right? He makes his bad choices intentionally, not just from peer pressure. We also learn that he can be manipulative and that he might not be reliable throughout the rest of the book. Can we always trust what he's saying? We don't know, because we're going to let the reader know that right now, when he says that he's not going to backslide, he's just saying what they want to hear. So we're building characterization about him, and that's going to be important when we go back and do the character background and you know, actually flesh out who this character is so that we know how to write him. He's released. He has nowhere to go. We're going to show how he doesn't have direction. He doesn't have any sort of structure to his life now that he's out of prison. And what's the first thing that he does, even though he said he wasn't going to backslide? Well, he goes and calls one of his old gangmates and arranges that meeting. And then, of course, that meeting is going to play out a little bit in this scene right here, scene number 3. So back to the fast forward. Flesh all these out now that you know why I do them and that sort of thing, and then we'll talk a little bit about that process. Okay, I'm going to take a break here because I have done about a quarter of the total plot, and I recommend that if you go through this process, you do this as well. If you want to keep yourself on track and do this all in one day, then it's good to sort of break things into small goals. So for me, that goal is usually more or less the first quarter at a time. I do one quarter at a time. So take note of the time here, 3:27. Since we started before, that's roughly 30 minutes to get through a quarter of these like actual specific scene plot points. I'm not going to go back and really talk about all of these points and why I chose them until later on when we go through a very quick version of that revision process. Some of these little bits and pieces are going to unfold as we go, and plotting out the scenes like this is going to give us more information about what else we need to go back and foreshadow, what we need to play up, what we need to play down, that sort of thing. So if I continue at this rate of doing about 25% roughly every half hour, then I can expect to finish this whole outlining process in about 2 hours. Added to all the other previous steps, you're looking at not even almost an entire working day. Like, I work full time, right, 8 to 10 hours a day, and it wouldn't take a full day to get through this outline process. Now, understand that obviously I've been doing this for a while now. I've written several novels, not just for myself, but for other people. I've spent a lot of time developing this system. It's very familiar to me. So if you use this same system, if you download the template below and then find that it takes a lot longer for you at first, then that's fine. Don't set your benchmark to what I'm doing right now and how quickly it goes. Just know that with some practice and with some exploration of exactly how this system works, you can absolutely get up to that speed. It's not unreasonable at all to expect to be able to outline a novel like this in about 5 to 6 hours if you work sort of consistently. All right, again, note the time, 4:27. Took a little bit of a break, had myself a glass of wine. It's 5 o'clock somewhere, and it's nearly 5 o'clock here. We ended with scene 8, so we pick up with scene 9, and we keep going. I just want to pause and say that right there, I did something. What I did is I filled out the entire scene. I was sort of following this through line and trying to figure out, how I could sort of demonstrate him missing cable. And what I did when I did that is that I didn't pay enough attention to what I had written in the summary up here. So as far as the process goes, this is something that's kind of important to keep in mind. The whole purpose of putting down the summary for each of the scenes is so that you're paying attention to the overall structure of the story, making all of the necessary moves to demonstrate character and things like that. Sometimes you'll find that you figure out a better way in the course of the scene, but if you discover that you have sort of veered off from your scene summary, you always want to check it against the scene summary itself. And just make sure that if you're making a change, you're making a change for the better, that you're moving in a better direction for the story. In that case, I had sort of didn't keep this part in mind, that he ditches a class to audit a lecture on culture and sexuality. That's a super important plot point because that's development for Austin. He's taking a page out of Cable's book, even though it still amounts to, you know, doing schoolwork and that sort of thing. It's him taking some of those first steps of directing his own course in life. So when I realized that there was a difference there, and that the difference was actually for the worse as far as the stories and the character development's concerned, that's the reason I went back and started this over. Okay, I'm going to slow down here for just a second so that I can kind of go back, and we're going to remember that when we came to scene 23 before, we realized that there's a lot happening here, right? There's like several things happening. In terms of how this is going to look inside the book, there's going to be these three scenes. I'm going to sort of paste them together really, really tightly. Let's go ahead and actually let me copy anything. Yep, there we go. Copy that. And just go ahead and make sure that we've got all of these. There we go. So these are going to be three somewhat shorter scenes. A little bit of a montage. We're going to catch up with him. The way that we do it, as long as it hits these 5 points, right, the pace will seem really fast, but it won't seem rushed to the reader. The things that will cause a book or a scene to feel really rushed, it has nothing to do really with the length of the scene. It has to do with whether or not you skip some of these steps. So if you've been paying attention, and of course we'll talk about a little bit of this later, but if you've been paying attention, some of these things stretch the definitions of things like reveals and stuff like that. Like this one, ignoring the push to talk about it, which is done in, that should be just. Cable learns that they're talking about the big score. Now that's a reveal, but there's a little bit more that's sort of subtle. There's a character reveal there, which is, you know, stuff that we've already sort of started learning about Cable. But you know, we learned that these people, even though they probably still respect him as, like, you know, a dude, a bad guy, or a bad boy, whatever, that they still, you know, they don't have limitless respect. They're still willing to make fun of him and about his about the fact that he's gay and stuff like that, and that crops up a little bit through their through line. So this is gonna build the sense, and we're gonna make notes about these things. In fact, let's make a note here. Building the sense that building the sense that the gang sees Cable as a tool, not a friend. So this is going to also highlight that directionlessness, right? So if you're part of a group of friends and you have sort of a common purpose, but everyone sees each other as people, as friends, they're willing to compromise, things like that, then in a sense you have a little bit of direction, you know, that group direction. Hopefully it's a good group. But in Cable's particular case, that's not the case with this gang. Early on, we're gonna sort of make a big deal about the fact that these people are, you know, obviously in scene 1, he reaches out to them. He considers them sort of his people. Later on, he has some other interactions with the gang. You know, they're happy to see him back. They want to include him in the stuff that they're doing. You know, he starts to think that maybe it's not his thing anymore. And then by this scene up here, where they're making fun of him, somewhere, anyways, well, I don't remember exactly which scene that is. Yeah, there we go. Where they make fun of him. It starts to be unclear between that point and this point, and then later on that they don't consider him a friend per se. They consider him a tool, and that's going to sort of play out and begin to sort of wrap up here in scene 23, because that's the last direct interaction he has with the gang. The rest of their subplot is going to happen off screen, which is important. I mean, granted, there's point of view, but in a romance specifically, in general, you want to stick with your main character's points of view. Depending on the book and how much action there is, and maybe there's a prologue, or maybe you want a couple of outside antagonist scenes. There's no rule against that. But in this particular case, since this whole video series is about writing this particular romance, just know that that's where that's where my head is at for these scenes involving the gang subplot, is that in the end, the way that they wrap up is going to be off screen. So all of this looks like a lot, but what we'll end up doing is when I actually get to the point where I write this scene, or in the notes, I'll talk about how short these scenes should be to jump from one to the other. It's perfectly fine for this to be an extra long chapter, or even to be broken up into multiple chapters. This book, you know, the particular romance pen name that I am going to be writing to, when I get into more contemporary romance. I've written mostly paranormal and specific niche romance so far. I'll probably end up handing this outline off to somebody else for whom Bad Boy is sort of what they do. I've already sort of put out some feelers, and by the time this video goes up and goes public, I'm hoping that that book will already be written and that you'll see a link for it in the bottom. But basically, what we're looking at here is that we've got these 3 scenes as sort of sub-scenes for scene 23. There was just a lot going on. If we break these up into multiple scenes, that's fine, but again, think about even though there are 3 scenes, if we squeeze these down to a much smaller than that 440, so let's say we give each of these, say, 200 words apiece, then we end up with roughly 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 1,000 words for this one, 1,000 words from this one, 1,000 words for this. Even though that's 3,000 words, which, if you remember before about plotting length, there we go. I talked about you know, how the length of each scene on average is gonna slow things really far down. That's for one average scene. So since these scenes could potentially be written at 1,000 words a time and really charge through this section as kind of his own sort of redemption montage just prior to the 3rd plot point, the pace when you read this chapter will not seem that slow at all, because you'll be hitting events, revelations, choices really fast in sequence. So that's the reason that there are 3 of these, and why that will probably work in terms of the experience of reading it. Also, that 3rd plot point, in terms of pacing the whole book, that 3rd plot point is going to be major. That's the point at which we're actually going to have to go, not plotting it now, but to know exactly what details are involved in that scene, we're going to have to actually go back and really look at his backstory, where he came from, what made him the way that he is, things like that. That's the conversation that he's going to have with Austin in that plot point. He's going to tell, you know, who he really is, where he's coming from. He's going to tell Austin what it is about Austin that, you know, made him want to change, that sort of thing. Of course, they're going to have sex, make-up sex, essentially, you know, and there's a lot going on. For these two scenes, for 23 and 24, because the emotional weight is so heavy, and this is the point that we've been sort of building to throughout most of the 1st and 2nd act, a lot of stuff is getting resolved. It's perfectly fine to write these scenes somewhat longer than the rest of the scenes in the book, in part because it's going to mark the last 25% of the book, so whatever you write here, as long as you keep the rest of the scenes that are planned roughly to their planned length, it'll be fine. Readers are going to enjoy slowing down for these couple of scenes. 31 chapters are outlined, all 31 scenes, and you can do it however you want to. You can put a couple of different scenes into a chapter. There's certainly places where that's happening here. For my own process, generally I do one scene per chapter. But again, if you want to go quicker pace, if there are things that you want to accomplish in a particular chapter and you want to break up into a couple of scenes to take a character through a couple of different steps for whatever reason, that still works for this. Generally, what you'll see if you're gonna follow this particular method, then remember those couple of chapters. Scene 23, we broke that down into 3 individual scenes after we wrote the summary for the overall scene, or what will become the overall chapter. And then scene 30, we ended up doing the same thing. We broke it up into 2 parts because part of the 2 parts because part of the whole process there involved at least 2 major steps, right? There's the protracted legal battle. We're going to kind of wrap that up pretty quickly and just focus on how it gets resolved and about Cable stepping up and that sort of thing. And then, of course, the finally free, that's the only thing that I really gave this scene, but basically it's the point where Cable makes the grand gesture in the end and confirms their relationship. That's the point at which they have officially fallen in love, committed to it. It's what we want at the end of a romance. But in my particular case, when I write, I like to provide what's called a denouement. It's the happy ending. It's how everything turned out after the end of the book. Some people call it sometimes like an epilogue or something like that. An epilogue sort of, you could label it an epilogue. Most epilogues are exactly that, a denouement. In a series, sometimes an epilogue is meant to sort of foreshadow the next book in a series, that sort of thing. So if you're writing a series and you want to get to that point, that's the reason and purpose of an epilogue. This book would work just fine without the final scene, without the denouement. It's just that extra icing on the cake, basically, and it happens a lot in romance, that follow-up chapter where we find out that there is, in fact, some sort of proposal, or if it wasn't the proposal, then it would have been that scene 31.2 where they actually move in together, that sort of thing. So one of the things that, as I went through this process, I ended up throwing in those bits about the architecture that I had mentioned before. So it's a little late in the story to deliver that right up here. We need to go back at some point and make a note about one of these scenes when they start talking to each other that Cable actually has an interest in architecture. So what we're going to do is write the notes in scene 4. So that's the point. Whenever we talk about, so let's see here. So we talk about step 11, going through and plotting out each individual scene. Step 12, revise again, make notes about foreshadowing Act 3 and Act 1 scenes, things like that. That's what this process is. So at the bottom of each of these, if you download the template, you'll see this. You've got your 5 points, and at the bottom you've got the notes section. And the notes section is where you go through and you sort of talk about what more specifically in terms of tone, in terms of foreshadowing, what little details do you want to throw in there. So let me talk for just a minute about this process, why I did what I did, what the value of these 5 points are, and how it helps us to write a book really quickly without getting too bogged down in the details this early on. The DDers, the Dirty Discourse folks, you've all heard this before, so take a look at the text down here to see where I skip over this, or listen to it again now that there's some context to it. the whole reason to do these 5 points basically just has to do with keeping the pace of the scene. I think I said before, if you sit down and write a scene off the top of your head, there's a really good chance that you will hit these 5 points. It's just the natural course of telling a story. If you have very little experience with storytelling, then there is a chance that you'll sort of skip some of these things. And with literary fiction, that's not a big deal. If you aren't consciously hitting these points, then it might still be a good scene. It might just not be as well-rounded and paced as it really needs to be to keep up a consistent pace over the course of the whole book. You can get away with a couple of scenes that don't include all 5 of these, but if you consistently miss points scene to scene throughout the course of the book, it's gonna seem choppy. It seems like the pace isn't really well controlled. It's gonna seem like there are parts where a scene could have used a little bit more, where there were things that were left unsaid, stuff like that. So this is just this method, and the next thing that I'm going to do here is write that first scene there following those 5 points. This method is about developing the plot, about developing the outline, doing it fast, being able to find the organic story while still sticking to some degree of structure, still maintaining a good pace across the whole book, maintaining good paces inside the scenes, maintaining good character arc and character development. If you were to take a look at this entire outline, top to bottom, which I'm about to go ahead and I'm not going to put too many notes in here because that's stuff that I'll end up actually doing after this video is made, when I go through and start doing revisions and stuff like that. And on your end, if you're following along, if you download the template and you decide to go through this process yourself to outline your book, that's something that it'll be up to you as well. You can use the notes section, you can make little revisions and add in little details and things like that to your heart's content, however detailed you want to be. The purpose of keeping them separate, of keeping the notes down here and keeping these scene points up here, is so that the flow of the scene is based on choices, on action, on events, things like that, things that move the story forward in some way. And then the details, that's just basically, you know, in the 440 words that you're going to use, for instance, to write all this out, how exactly does that go? What specific key points do you want to hit? Do we want to name the warden? Do you want to talk about Cable's sexuality right away? That sort of thing. Like, what do you want to include in this scene on top of that action? So the notes are going to have to do with things like, if it was a fantasy, they might include world building notes. You might talk about how in this scene you want to, you know, demonstrate or mention that there are airships or something like that. So all of those details, if you put them in those 5 points and really get into the detail there, then you're going to end up with a really messy outline that's clogged with all of this erroneous matter that's going to slow you down when it comes time to write. Instead, the writing process itself, you know, you'll sit down to write scene 1, you look over your points, you look over your notes, you figure out, you know, how do you want to apply those notes to the points. You write point 1, you get to that 440 word mark because you're watching the word count as you go, and I'll show you how that works in Scrivener, just in case Scrivener is new to you, or if you're just now finding and downloading Scrivener in order to follow this or to use the template. It just makes things much smoother. It gives you constant sense of direction. You know what details you need to drop in where, and having that stuff down at the bottom keeps it from basically getting into your way up here. So now that we've got this, this is sort of a technical thing, but I'm basically going to show you how it is that I go through, how I actually like take all this and turn it into an outline. So first of all, let's see here. We're going to go to File, Compile. Go ahead and click this little arrow here. You can choose a variety of outputs. I'm going to use .doc instead of docx. If you're running Microsoft Word, by all means use a docx file. A doc file will open just a little bit better if you're using OpenOffice, and that's what I'm using on this machine. So we've got all of these. It's got all of the necessary files lined up there. I don't want to include all the steps because that stuff will be redundant. So what I'm left with is just the manuscript file. Your top level document, you have to leave that checked in order to include anything that's in it. So I've got my top level document, and then the manuscript. Here are all the scenes. And now remember that over the course of this, we have scenes that have synopses. They've got the yellow area that was up here. That's what you can actually see on the cards. And then under that, they've got the notes. So from here, you're going to go to formatting. Level 1, we don't really need there's no text in it. We don't really need the titles. For level 1 plus, we do need the titles for these things because we've got scene 4, scene 5, and then in some of these we have scene 30.1, scene 30.2, and that sort of thing. We want to make sure the titles are there for both of those. We don't really need the metadata, but we do need the synopsis, and we do need the notes. We don't want any separators, or at least I don't want any separators. If you want all of those, the scene 1, scene 2, if you want these all to be on their own page, which you may, if what you want to do is export it to Word and send it to, if you have someone that you work with as sort of a second set of eyes for plotting, you may want to do that, and that may leave them room to actually make notes at the bottom too for collaboration, that sort of thing. That's perfectly fine. I'm not going to do it that way, so I don't want any page breaks. I'm just going to make everything else empty line just to make sure that there aren't any breaks like that. I'll have the titles to tell me where everything is. Transformation replacements, nope, all of that stuff is fine. So then go back up to the contents. I've got all my scenes, including my sub scenes, 30.1, 30.2, 23, I think 23.1, 2, and 3. So going to hit that, compile. It's going to offer you to save it. Bad boy, college. What else have we got? Criminal. Those are good. .scriv or .doc it'll be, and that's going to be in the same folder where I'm saving all these videos. Right, so let's take a look at how that actually opens up. See what it looks like. And again, there's a timestamp that should pop up below when I get done with this video. If you've seen all of this stuff, if you know how this all works, then I mean, you don't really have to take a look at this part, but for those of you that are new to Scrivener, I'll show you exactly what kind of an output you can expect. And then, of course, I'm going to copy and paste the actual outline itself into the outline file. I'm going to actually copy and paste the outline file into the place where it fits in the document itself, in the template. See, there we go. We get this from top to bottom. It says scene 1, disturbance cable. We get the synopsis. Tells us what's going on there. We get our notes, scene points, if there were notes here. So in the event that, again, you were talking with someone that you're collaborating with, if you got a second set of eyes on it, this would be the place where you would want those people to say whatever they're going to say, whether you're sharing it in Google Docs or not. And the reason for that is that you just don't want to mess with this stuff just yet. You want to take whatever notes you make, and if you're going to revise the scene synopsis, the scene points themselves, you're going to want to take the notes and apply them to that and not make notes in this space. We got our scene 2, disturbance, Austin, synopsis. Further down, let's see if we can find scene 23. 19. Here we go. Scene 23, we have our top level synopsis. You know, that's everything that sort of happens in this whole thing. And then we've got our 23.1, synopsis, scene notes, synopsis, scene notes. So this breaks everything down in a really direct sort of way. I highly recommend exporting the entire outline. And at the website where I actually sell outlines, this is how I generate the base outline that I then add into other information about character and stuff like that. Those I'll generally sell, I'll generally have as a PDF And it's simple to take this file and turn it into a PDF after other stuff is added into it. The only reason I do that is just it's only when I sell outlines, and the reason that I do it is because not everybody uses Scrivener. Some people just don't want to, refuse to, don't understand how to. I highly recommend Scrivener as a tool. I can't recommend it enough. You've seen over the course of this process how I've used it, how I've used the synopsis and the notes. It just makes everything so remarkably clean and clear and easy to use. I'm going to clean this up a little bit since we ended up breaking that into a couple of scenes. So yeah, we end up with an outline file. Now, if I was going to take this and turn it into a book for myself, again, I don't really write Bad Boy personally, so it's not something that I'll probably put in my catalog. But I might go back and just, if you're using this template, you might go back and delete these files so that you don't have to worry about, or move them into research, for instance. You just click, drag, put it into research. Same thing for the outline. Click, drag, drop it into research. Oh, here we go. There we go. That way everything's just a little bit cleaner, right? So this is the point at which now only now that the whole book is plotted, now that everything is laid out and we know exactly where the story is going to go, only at this point do we go back and we look at the hero and the heroine and we deal with their backgrounds and stuff. When this plot gets compiled and brushed and I add in options and things like that, the way that I write the plots that I sell, I throw in options. How this story, for instance, there's the main character, Austin, the heroine character. There's no reason over the course of this book why Austin has to be a guy, for instance. So you can easily make him a girl and the story flows just fine. There are places where the action can be tuned up a little bit, it can be tuned down a little bit. There's the possibility of either adding in a couple of scenes or taking away a few scenes. If the author wants to, for instance, drive this scene to a little bit more action, then that confrontation between Cable and the gang, that can be a little bit more violent, for instance, and the confrontation between Austin and the member who's wounded that he sees late in the game, that could be tweaked up to be a little bit more violent, that sort of thing. You could go back and make the interactions that Austin has with, that Cable has with his gang and with the parole officer, all of that. When it comes down to the language, how the scene is written, any of these scenes can be written to a different tone just using those plot points, just using the scene points, right? So whichever way we actually write out these five scene points is going to change considerably the tone of that scene. So the nature, the essence of the book, how we want the tone to be, we can do that with language. Whereas the story itself is the main point of all of this process, is to make sure that the story is complete, that it's balanced, that it's coherent, that it meets the expectations and the needs of the reader. And as long as we've got a good structure in place like this, then that's what we've got. So I'm going to take a quick break again. Make sure that the video chunks here don't get too big. When I come back, there's going to be very little talking. I'm pretty much just going to speed through a first draft of scene 1, and then we'll talk a little bit about how I adapted the scene points into the actual scene itself, and then that's pretty much the end of this video, ladies and gentlemen. If you stuck with me this far, then congratulations. You've endured what is most likely the single most boring video series on YouTube currently to date. So I wish I had like a prize that I could give you for that, because I feel like it really deserves a prize. But we are almost at the end of our journey. will hopefully at some point find an author to actually write to this outline, and when they do, I'm going to put a link to that book below, so that if you've already seen it, then hopefully you'll have the chance to actually see how this outline becomes a book, and also hopefully have a chance to see the difference between the outline that you're looking at, this structure that we've gone through this journey to create, versus the book that it actually becomes, because that transformation from an outline to a book can be just sort of mind-blowing to see how it actually happens and to see the choices that the author makes, versus as you're sort of experiencing these videos, looking at each scene, exploring the template, things like that, and thinking to yourself how you might write these scenes. Like, if you were to pause the video at any point in the last couple of minutes and take a look at these 5 scene points, what I would love more than just about anything is that if you're a viewer and you're seeing these 5 scene points, I'd really, really love for you to actually write roughly a 2,200 or 2,000 to 2,200 word scene, or more, whatever length it is that you kind of feel like it needs. I would absolutely love for you to write that and email me a copy of it to brian.magus, that's M-A-G as in to email me that at brian.magus@gmail.com. Those scenes, what I'd like to do, if you're willing to submit them, is I'd like to collect them at my website, the www.theplotwizard.com, to really highlight how different authors can take the same structural points and come up with something that looks and feels completely different. Because that's the whole point of this process, is that it's super flexible, that the outline that it comes out with, you're not locked into a specific tone, you're able to interpret things. All of the structural bits are there, you just have to get in there and give it your own voice, and that's really, really important.